My name is Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean of the College of Communication. I'm also a really proud COM alum and a parent of a recent BU grad. I'm excited to welcome you to today's COM Talks event, From Side Hustle to CEO, Taking Back Control of Your Career. This event was organized by the COM Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, a really energetic and inspiring group here at the college. I want to make a special thanks to them for their hard work and to our speakers today for their time and their insights, which I'm excited to learn about. Today's conversation will be wide-ranging, and it's a really important one, especially considering the obstacles that are faced by women in communities of color. Panelists will talk about key questions such as, when is it the time to risk it all and go out on your own? And when you do decide to make the jump, if you do, how do you stay true to yourself about your principles? You'll hear from a panel of communication entrepreneurs about their professional journeys, and you'll learn from their firsthand experience and advice. And when you have questions and want to get their insights, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and not the chat. And please feel free to put those questions in at any time. And I promise you there'll be plenty of time to discuss them along the way during this event. Now it's my genuine pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, let's say hello to Ivyis Morales, who graduated from COM in 2012 and brings a decade of experience in using marketing as a force for good for brands of all sizes, from inside major creative agencies like Ogilvy, Cone Communications, and IDEO, as well as nonprofits like Europe. Since 2018, Ivyis has served as a visionary behind Bombilla, a branding and design agency for social change. Bombilla, which means light bulb in Spanish, is fueled by a national network of diverse creatives who conspire with systems changing organizations to make the world a brighter place. And you can learn more at bombilla.co. How are you doing today, Ivyis?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me today.
So glad you're here. And now it's a pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Manpreet Kalra, who graduated from COM in 2011 and is a social impact advisor, anti-racism educator, speaker, and activist working to decolonize storytelling. She navigates the intersection of impact communication and sustainable global development. Having worked in venture capital and startups, Manpreet founded Art of Citizenry to support impact-driven brands that are prioritizing people and the planet, furthering her vision to address power structures across the social impact ecosystem. She co-founded her second business, Reclaim Collaborative, a community of brands and content creators who are dedicated to dismantling systems of oppression. Her activism focuses on the interconnectivity of economic, social, and climate justice. She educates using a variety of media, including the Art of Citizenry podcast, where she shares her nuanced and unfiltered insights on building a more just and equitable future. She also serves on the board of the New York City Fair Trade Coalition and co-established the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee of the Fair Trade Federation. Now, so great to have you here today, Manpreet.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. Welcome. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Anya Cherrice Gonzales, who is a grad of COM in 2015 and the founder of Navigating Culture and the host of a podcast called The Homesickness Cure. Born and raised in Trinidad, she started her American journey by attending Boston University. While taking journalism and advertising classes, her love for storytelling deepened. Reflecting on her own experiences, Anya decided to create community for immigrants and first-generation immigrants who struggle to navigate into the intersectionalities of living between two cultures. Essentially, her company's mission is to encourage these folks to learn how to self-validate, remove self-doubt, and redefine archaic ideas of success. Shortly after her 2015 graduation from COM, Anya moved to San Francisco to work in Silicon Valley. She creates marketing programs for Miro, one of the world's fastest growing startups. And welcome to you, Anya. And now I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. So I want to say thank you to Dean Mariette DiCristina, to BU, and most importantly, to our panelists, Ivellisse and Manpreet. So what's so exciting about this panel today is that not only did these two women go to BU and made careers that center equity and social justice and creativity, they're both women of color who've made careers in entrepreneurship and are winning. They are succeeding. And so I'm so excited because we're getting to have a conversation with these two powerhouses about their personal journeys, their businesses, and the impact their work is making in the world. So my first question is about entrepreneurship. I'd love to know, what does entrepreneurship mean to each of you? And let's start with Ivellisse.
Thank you, Anya. So to me, entrepreneurship is the skill and practice of making your dreams come true. A lot of us immediately associate entrepreneurship with making money, but you can be an entrepreneur with passion projects, with community service initiatives. It's really having the vision, putting a plan, and then using resources and people to bring it into action, bring it into life. So when it comes to actual business building, my business is definitely my handmade gift to the world because I'm intentionally thinking through all of the elements, and having that autonomy and blank slate is both can be overwhelming, but super exciting, especially trying to build a business differently that operates differently by design.
Manpreet?
Yeah, I love this question because I think that, there's so many narratives that have been built around what is entrepreneurship. And it is unfortunate that often the narrative that is most dominated is this idea of the Silicon Valley, white male, cis, gender individual who is hustling in ways that often compromise ethics and are oftentimes even exploitative. And I think that oftentimes entrepreneurship is at a systems level. To me, I think that narrative really needs to change because entrepreneurs
I'm just checking to see, Ivellisse, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. So
comes in all different shapes and forms. Oh no, you lost me. How much did you lose?
Manpreet, I think it may be best to start over so that when we edit, we can get the full scope of your answer. So let's ask again. Manpreet, I'd love to start with entrepreneurship. What does entrepreneurship mean to you?
Oh, for sure. I'm so sorry. I am having technical issues today, and if it proceeds, I will come in from my phone. But essentially, entrepreneurship, I think, has been very much dominated by this one version of what entrepreneurship is. It's often seen as a cis white male in Silicon Valley who is trying to essentially, through oftentimes very exploitative measures, try to really build this business. And it's really seen as something that's glamorous. It's seen as something that's really hard to obtain. And I think that notion of what entrepreneurship is needs to change. To me, I agree with what Ivyis was saying, is that entrepreneurship is about truly giving yourself the space to let your dreams really flourish, and nurturing those dreams and your vision for what you want to see. What does change mean to you? What does really trying to create and build something that you are truly passionate about look like? And that, to me, is entrepreneurship. It's about where your passions and your dreams come together. And really, it's about co-creation, because entrepreneurship, I think, is often seen as a very solo experience, but there's something really powerful about co-creating and letting others come into that journey with you.
Manpreet, Ivellisse, I'm really grateful that you shared that, because I think in my own experience, you know, especially somebody who lived in Silicon Valley for 4+ years, that is the image that you see. But when I listen to your answers and I hear them, like I think about my mother, who's always had a side hustle of catering and being able to help support her family that way. I think about my uncle, who always had a side business because he was passionate about gardening and landscaping and plants. And those are not typically who you see when you think about entrepreneurship and business, but I don't think you can say that they are not entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurs because they are creating businesses that are sustainable to them and that are helping move the community forward.
Absolutely.
So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about your origin stories. So I really do feel like origin stories have a huge impact on our current journeys. And so with that, I want to go back to BU. Every college experience has at least some impact on how we show up in the world and the work that we ultimately do. So how do you think your time at BU shaped your curiosities, your ambition, and your desire to do good? And I'd love to start with Manpreet.
Most definitely. So while I was at BU, I actually started my first passion project. And that, I think, you know, Evie, when you were talking yesterday about sometimes the journeys are like this weird map and you want to see how it all connects. And sometimes it's so hard to describe it in words. I hear you, because I feel that way with my own journey. As my time at BU, it was really a chance for me to explore all the different avenues through which my talents, skills, and passions came together. I had a radio show with WTBU. I took, my first time doing my passion project was I was taking a design course in comm, and we had to create a website using Dreamweaver. And so I turned what was at the time a Tumblr blog into a website with Dreamweaver, which is something that we do not hear of now. Times have changed, but that experience of really seeing how I can use my skills and my in-class learning to really complement and advance on my own interests was brilliant. And my passion project when I was at comm was, I come from I am by faith Sikh. I am Punjabi by culture. And I come from a community that has experienced a lot of generational trauma. And oftentimes the narratives that we see that are being shaped in the media are not ones that resonate with my experience. And I think, Anya, you're doing exactly this, right? Like you are, through your work, highlighting voices and experiences that are often not easily made accessible. And so that was what I did. I started a online lifestyle magazine for the Sikh female community. And, I started this while at BU. I got featured in BBC. It was amazing. LA Times did an article. It was amazing. It was such an experience of growth and opportunity for me. It was also, at that time, I didn't think of that as entrepreneurship. I didn't think of that as being a CEO. I didn't think of it as anything other than me just putting my heart into something I was super passionate about, sitting in the GSU, looking at Google Analytics all the time. It was awesome. And, for me, often the experiences I had at BU really encouraged me to think about power, to think about privilege, to think about race, and to really think about how those intersect to create our identities, which is why I think it's also important that we take a moment to acknowledge the hate crime that happened yesterday in Atlanta, right? Like, I think that it's incredibly important to create safe spaces. And for me, that's what my time at BU really encouraged me to think critically about is like, where does my power and privilege lie? And how do I use my power and privilege, acknowledge my power and privilege, and think about ways in which I can create more actionable change? And I think, that's why I encourage everyone to also have those critical conversations with yourself, because I think that communication and comm in particular really encourages us to think about how words matter. And in the case of the shooting in Atlanta, I mean, I think we can all say that that was a hate crime, yet that is not the phrase that is being used to talk about the situation. And so really, I think that thinking about language, thinking about power, thinking about privilege is so critical, because as communicators, we shape narratives. We have the ability to challenge narratives. And I think that that's something that's so important. And that's something I did a lot of and learned a lot about while I was at BU.
Thanks so much for bringing attention to the hate crimes that happen in Atlanta. I think it's really important that we understand what's going on and that we pay attention to it, because when we pay attention to things that we see in the world that are not right, then we can come together and make a change to end these sorts of things in our lifetime. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing that up. Evie, I'd love to hear your take about your experience at BU and how spending time on ComAv and going to Com really helped shape who you are as a person today.
Thank you. So I'm so grateful that to this day, the majority of my friends are from BU. And interestingly, not everyone I was necessarily friends with while in college. Like the friendships bloomed post-college. And I'm actually in Oakland. And the contingent of BU folks in the Bay Area is so amazing. I mean, Anya, we got to socially distant hang out or something. So in terms of how I even got to BU, so I went to school in New Haven, Connecticut, and I participated in a program called NIFTY, National Foundation of Teaching Entrepreneurship. And through that program, I learned about entrepreneurship and business. And in that exercise, I just came alive when I had to brainstorm on how do I get the word out there. I've always been a people person. I've always enjoyed designing experiences, being a performer. And so the idea of public relations, of impacting public opinion was super fascinating to me. Like, how do you get someone to say yes? And genuinely, right? Not like peer pressuring people into buying things or doing things they don't want to do. But the power of communication, I mean, we see what happens when it's used in a negative way, right? The power of propaganda, but imagine the power of propaganda for good. And so that's what I've been really trying to explore. And so I thought I wanted to get into politics. I knew I wanted to major in PR and communication. So I only applied to 3 schools: Emerson College, Northeastern, Boston University. I got accepted into all of them, but BU really wanted me with that financial aid package. So I was like, I am there. I said yes. I didn't even visit the campus. Literally, my first time on campus was for Multicultural Weekend. And that's where I met a lot of my friends to this day. And so what's really neat about BU is that BU actually had the first school of public relations. So getting really nerdy about this field and this practice, it just felt like the right fit to learn the subject matter. And then once I got into campus, I did not hold back from both having fun and doing work. So I worked at the Howard Thurman Center. I worked at the Student Activities Office. I worked at summer orientation. So a lot of like people and events-based work, bringing communities together. And then by the time I graduated BU, I had 10 internships under my belt. So I was definitely a typical eager beaver PR student. I was like, wait until junior year to intern. Oh no, I started my freshman year, created opportunities, knocked on doors, and really focused on interning at nonprofits, doing comms work, or at agencies with nonprofit clients. And then my first job was at Cone Communications, which was started by Carol Cone, who is a BU alumna. And I got that gig through Professor Jonathan Yohannan, who, I asked him out for coffee because I saw he worked there and he taught sustainability. And I was just, in asking for that informational interview, just really asking him, like, how do you have a career where you can use the power of communications to spark change? And it's all unfolded from there. So BU is definitely my learning laboratory, my hub for friends, and a playground for my career.
Thanks for sharing that with us. So I want to make sure that we get all of the questions answered. And so I want to jump right into Erica Mattison's question, because we just spent a lot of time talking about your origin stories, why BU was so important to your journeys, and really ended up in a space of this is why my business is the way that it is. And I think when you as an entrepreneurship talk about business, the next question that people have is, how did you do it? How did you get from this is an interesting idea, I'm really curious about these things, to I am making an impact, I'm making money, et cetera, et cetera. So Erica wants to know, if you worked full-time while getting your business off the ground, how did you organize yourself and prioritize your needs so that you had sufficient time to do both? And I'll just give the question to Manpreet first, and then we'll go to you, Ivy.
Awesome. Yes, so I definitely did work initially while my journey's been really interesting. It is definitely a roller coaster of loops and ladders. And I did work. So one of the things I did was I made sure that I knew what I needed to be financially comfortable in order to launch my business. And so I really thought about how can I and I'm a very type A personality. So I was really in okay, this is what I need in order for myself to feel comfortable to take a risk. And sometimes that mindset works. Sometimes it can hinder you. And sometimes trying to balance work and entrepreneurship very challenging. And I've kind of done a combination.
Evie, while we wait for Manpreet to jump back on, do you want to jump in and answer that question?
Sure. So I definitely took a calculated risk and planned my exit from my full-time job. So for context, I was so chronically stressed from my job that I had to take paid leave, which on a federal level, all employers are required to provide leave benefits, Family Medical Leave Act. And I was just very lucky that my employer at the time also provided compensation during that time off. And so my doctor basically was just like, you can't keep going into the environment that is triggering you, because it's clear it's work. And I went almost a year and a half ignoring the physical manifestations of chronic stress, right? I'm such a high performer and high achiever that, perhaps I can handle more stress than others. Clearly, I chose to be a business owner and, deal with all of that fun stuff. But, when is it too far? And I think my body was like, you need to sit your butt down. And so I had a migraine that lasted 3 days where I couldn't drink water. I couldn't even look at a screen. Like literally my body was like, you're not working. And that was my wake up call that I can't keep going on this path. And in that time off where I was able to decompress, I mean, such a blessing to be able to be not working, but not on vacation because I was healing. But during that time, it was like, I've already been inside my dream companies, and they're all broken inside. And like, where else am I going to apply to? I'm not interested in repeating this. When you look at my career, you know, you could label me a typical millennial in that I haven't stayed at an employer for more than 2 years, but why stay somewhere where you don't belong and that isn't healthy for you? So I've always been quick to remove myself from situations that don't work for me. And so in that time off, I realized, hey, you know, I was side hustling at the time. So I was providing graphic design and logos to friends. And I realized, like, you know, what would it look like to freelance? Because in the Bay Area, the freelance lifestyle is everywhere, as you can imagine. It feels accessible here. And so when I came back to work, I also brought in the support of a friend of mine who at the time launched her own business as a business success coach. So I hired her to hold me accountable to leaving my job. So we put a 6-month plan. I said, you know, January 31st, 2018 is my last day in the corporate world, worked backwards from there. So in those 6 months, I built a little website. I came up with my business name. I started telling everybody. I started going to like women's entrepreneur events. And by the time I left my job, I had some savings. I had some paying projects and clients under my belt, and kind of figured out all the bits and pieces that I needed to feel confident in taking the leap.
Amazing. So what I'm hearing from you, Evie, is that you had to take the time, but you used that time as a way to not just regenerate, but also think about your business. And you, in that time, hired a business coach. So you got help, you got coaching, you got mentorship, and you very slowly put together a plan where you were taking clients and figuring out what you would need to be able to quit your 9 to 5, and like what resources and expenses and income you would need to be able to sustain yourself when you eventually went full-time on Jan 31st, 2018. Manpreet, you're back. Yay, I'm so glad.
I'm so sorry, everyone. This is really inconvenient for everybody, so I apologize.
Okay, these things happen when you're live, but I'd love to learn from you. What did it take to get your business off the ground, especially if you work full time? And also, you know, how did you start monetizing? I think that's what everyone's curious about.
Yeah, so for me, it was really interesting. I essentially had a business. I didn't expect myself to have a business. I had my first client approach me and was like, oh, do you consult? Like, do you have a consulting firm? Would you be interested in being a consultant for our company? And this was in the fair trade sector. And that night I was at a conference. I was giving a talk on marketing for ethical brands. And that night, I essentially created a website in my hotel room, and and basically the next day had a QR code that people could scan if they ever asked me if I have a business, and had them scan it so they had my website because I didn't have business cards. And so that was honestly my entrepreneurial journey. I kind of just got thrown in it, and you know, I mentioned earlier I'm a very type A personality, and so this was very much going against everything, like the plans that I would map out. So I would say I do have a much more unconventional experience when it comes to entrepreneurship. And it's been a lot of figuring things out. You know, I will say that my first, I don't like using the term failed, but my first startup that I did not successfully scale was my passion project at BU, because, you know, I didn't even know like that I was being an entrepreneur, that this was a possibility, this I could monetize this. And I think that that's a trap that we often fall into. It's like, what does monetization look like? What does sustainable entrepreneurship look like? And it's partially because we've been fed this narrative that entrepreneurship is either you are going IPO or you're getting bought out, right? Like those are the two main ways, especially in the Bay, that we talk about entrepreneurship. But as we've discussed, you know, for me, it's been a lot about how do I build a sustainable business that stays true to my passion and my original vision. And Evie, I know you've mentioned the same thing, is how do we create sustainable businesses that continue to line up with why we even started what we're doing in the first place?
I love that, Manpreet. Thanks for sharing. For me, you had an opportunity and went for it. And I love hearing that in both you and Evie's story. It's the innovation, it's the willingness to make things happen, it's the ingenuity that's really exciting. And I think like as women of color, we're used to that, right? We're used to being like, let's figure it out, let's go. But I I also want to say, like, to people listening, like, don't let that stop you. Like, don't sit at home being like, well, I don't know. Like, no one's ever asked me for anything. Like, no one's ever offered to pay me for anything. Don't let what could be and like what your potential business could scale to stop you from starting. I think what's really important and what's worked for me is just get really attuned to your strengths. You know, like, what do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing? Meditate on that, think about that, explore that, and then don't be afraid to dive into those passion projects. And it is through exploration that we get to where we want to go. So many of us feel and operate in life that clarity comes from thought, and clarity never comes from thought. You can't just sit and think all day about what you're going to do and how you're going to make it happen. You have to start tinkering. You have to start exploring and trying and making things happen. Not in a big way, but, you know, like Evie said, like, she was interested in graphic design. She started making logos and telling people about it. And eventually people were willing to pay her. It's like what Manpreet was saying. You know, she was interested in decolonizing storytelling, even though she didn't know what that meant at the time. She wanted to create a space for people who looked like her, and she was seeing a void in that. So I just want to encourage everyone who's listening, like, don't let what could be stop you from starting. Think about it, yes, right, yes, but then start exploring, because that's how you get where you want to go.
And I just want to jump in there just for a second, is I think as women of color, we also undervalue what we have to offer to the world. And that comes in the form of imposter syndrome, that comes in the form of not pricing our services at a rate that seems at all respectable to ourselves. And this is something that I still continue to navigate is, you know, I think that it's very easy to fall into the trap of, well, maybe I'm not as good at doing X, Y, and Z. And I think that, you know, all those insecurities that we have, they're just, you know, they're part of how we've been nurtured to think, but also they really come from a place that can really hinder growth. And so I think it's really important that we also recognize that what we have to offer the world is worth something.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought that up, Manpreet, because I think it flows so well into our next question. I think that so many of us, forgive the assumption, but grew up with this looming expectation of a quote unquote respectable career. You know, we grew up in communities where our elders are saying most likely that, you know, our only options are like doctor and lawyer, accountant, engineer. And I'm not saying that to blame them. I think they're just looking at like what people are doing that makes them stable and like makes them seem respectable in society at large. And so they put those restrictions unintentionally on us. And so as a result, like so many of us even though we may be considering entrepreneurship, we shy away from it because of what other people may say. And we don't fully jump into it because of what other people may say. So can you share, one, how we can change that narrative of a respectable career, and two, how we can move and help each other move past the fear of starting something that may be unstable in the beginning and grow into a success? And before you answer that, I just want to remind people, like, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A because we will make sure and answer those. Manpreet, go first.
Oh, okay. I'll go first. So I like to joke that the moment I accepted that I was going to go to comm, any expectations around what is perceived as a, to a certain degree, any perception on what is perceived as a conventional or stable career was thrown out the door for my loved ones. They knew that whatever I was going to do, it was not going to be necessarily in those fields per se. Not to say that doors are ever closed, but for me, it was always, I've always enjoyed seeing where creativity and passion can really guide you. And I think that this idea and notion about, what is a respectable career can really hinder us. It feeds into imposter syndrome. It feeds into this narrative of, what am I doing? I'm just going, I should just get a 9 to 5, call it good. Like, what is the, why am I doing this? And it hinders growth. And I agree. I mean, I am, my partner actually is a physician. And this is so personal, but when we, first started dating, my biggest fear around us potentially getting married was I didn't want people to place assumptions on the fact that, oh, I don't need to worry about finances, or I don't need to worry about my business. Like, I can do whatever I want because I have a partner that is like what is considered stable. And I think that feeds into really these assumptions that we place on ourselves as women. Like, I've always pride myself as an independent individual, very financially savvy. And those assumptions have been placed on me and do continue to be placed on me. And it's really challenging. But I think that it's important that in order for us to really change that narrative, we need to also be comfortable with discomfort. And we have to encourage each other and find community. And finding community is just so powerful because it encourages us to really create meaningful change.
Thanks, Manpreet. Evie, I'd love to hear your take on that. Like, I'd love to hear how we can change this narrative of a respectable career and how we can help each other move past the fear of starting something that may be unstable in the beginning, but can turn into a success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like, my family can't tell me nothing. Like, thankfully there was no pressure on like what I had to be when I grew up. Honestly, like, I actually have a picture right here of my parents and my degree. But like, getting a college education was both their highest but lowest expectation of me. It was like, whatever you do, just make sure you graduate college. So, been there, done that. They still don't know what I do, but I'm making them proud. And I think, honestly, it is such a blessing to have figured out how to make money using what I'm good at.
Mm-hmm.
So, my strengths are in ideation, and people management. So I'm self-taught in graphic design. I have since moved away from doing the work, and now I manage a team of creatives. And, we don't have to be starving artists. There is a way to make money using your creative gifts if that's the profession and pursuit that you want. And so figuring out, that sweet spot is like the lifelong experiment I'm making with Bombilla. It's like, how do you make a living and make a difference and have fun? Because I know it's possible in a world that tells you it's not. And having been in multiple creative agencies where, they're treating us like robots for our intellectual and creative capital, it's just not possible. So having the first lived experience of doing the work to design what I know we need better. And also paving the way for creatives that work for me, whether they're employees or contractors and freelancers, because they're also learning how to do client services, learning how to manage their time and price projects. And one thing I want to mention too is that, everyone starts their business on a different step. Everyone has their own journey. But what I have found is that typically what comes first is the product or the service. So maybe you make really good cookies and you learned that you can sell them. Or maybe you have graphic design skills that someone else is willing to learn. So at first, you're just doing the thing until you arrive to a point where you're like, oh, snap, I think I need a business plan.
Yeah.
So, what's really accelerated my growth is business education. And so I've been participating and I'm a member of the Uptima Entrepreneur Cooperative, Uptima spelled UPTIMA. They're in Boston and in the Bay Area, and they're a cooperative of entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, culturally relevant business education where you can take classes on business planning, on financial forecasting, on operations, all the aspects of a business that of course we don't know because we got to learn, but the hustle that you bring to that work is what sets you apart from anyone else with an idea. And so it's not like I know what I'm doing. It's, I figure out what I don't know and then find the resources or the people to fill in those gaps. So to answer someone's question, I have a ton of mentors. And not all of them are necessarily through the BU ecosystem. I would say a lot of them have been, I've kind of picked them up and put them in my pocket over the years, old bosses, people I've met at conferences. So like one of my mentors, for example, has their own Design for Good agency that they've been running for 15 plus years. So, I'm getting more senior counsel from someone who's been there, done that, and can see where I'm struggling in year 3. I also have mentors that bring in that financial perspective. Like my mentor she actually worked in impact investing. So she can look at my cash flow analysis and see things I can never see, but she's getting me, she's helping me get smarter on profitability and our numbers. So, and maybe this, is connected to how I just had to be resourceful growing up. Like my parents, they emigrated from Puerto Rico. And so I was the first to navigate the higher ed system. I applied for financial aid on my own, gave them the paperwork to sign. No one told me how to get internships, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really leaning on my friends, my peers, and people who cared about me to continue illuminating the next step.
Manpreet, did you want to say something before I jump in? Or okay, great.
Nope.
Well,
Keep going.
I love that you keep on bringing up, both of you, this importance of coaching and community. I think so often we're like, oh, I could do it by myself. And really, truly, we have to lean into this understanding that we're human and we can't know everything and we're not experts in everything. And a quote, someone guiding you and saying, hey, like, of course you are knowledgeable in your own business, but here's where I see you can improve, is going to help you go that much further and that much farther. So I love that you keep on talking about that. And I think it's great for everyone to hear, not just in business, but in any area of your life where you want to supercharge your growth, like tapping into mentors and coaching and community of people who want to do the same things is key. Speaking about coaching and community especially, I feel like the concept of values just has to come up. So speaking about important work and work that aligns with your mission and values, which is work that both of you are doing, I want to know, have you ever had an experience where you felt like you had to turn down business because that particular client's values didn't align with your own? Evie, I'd love to hear from you.
Yes. So the beauty of running your own business is that you can choose who you do business with. And at the very beginning, when, especially if you are doing it full time and need to bring in cash, you are in a position where you have to say yes to everything. And so I guess to back up a little bit, I'm self-taught in graphic design, and get your employer to pay for your professional development, because I definitely had employers pay for my Adobe Creative Suite skills. So, I started side hustling in 2016, and I was, just taking side projects up until 2018 when I left full time. When I started full time, I didn't think we were going to grow this quickly. I thought that, maybe I'll just be by myself for a while. But I said yes to too many projects, to the point where I just started paying my friends like $25, $30 an hour to help me with things behind the scenes. And then next thing I knew, I'm managing 12 contractors on like web projects, graphic design projects of all sizes, et cetera, et cetera. Woo, and it was a lot of work. And I definitely learned the hard way what not to do, trial by error. It's what business is, pretty much. And so 3 years in, we're definitely at a place where we can identify what works and what doesn't work for us. So for example, our priority is to protect the creative process. We're fighting urgency, perfectionism, speed, everything that you see in a creative corporate environment that makes the work painful and makes it painful for the creative. And you can't do things overnight. You don't go to a baker and ask them to make you a wedding cake the day before. So why would you want a website the day before, right? So anywho, so in our initial discussions, letting them know how we work and what our boundaries are. And we find that like the clients that we enjoy working with also respect that and respect us. So there's a power dynamic between agency and a client. And in the corporate world, right, like we would get bullied. Like I get triggered sometimes because I would have clients that would just tear us to shreds for no reason and just not treat us humanly. So really bringing our humanity first into our work. And it's really helpful when the majority of our clients honestly are people from our first to second degree network. So between our clients, our contractors, our employees, it really feels like we're friends and family. And one of my favorite quotes from Arlen Hamilton, who's the CEO of Backstage Capital, which is a VC firm that funds Black and Brown LGBT plus businesses. She says that businesses are community made, not self-made. You really, really cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
Manpreet, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think so throughout my work, I work in a space that is very much dominated by cultural and religious hegemony. And so I have, over the years, really learned what kind of spaces I feel that I provide the most value and what kind of clients align with my core values. And definitely, I mean, turning down work is you have to acknowledge that there is a certain level of privilege to be able to do that, right? You have financial privilege if you're able to turn down work. And so I've had to really navigate that quite a bit. And I think that, one of the things that's so important to recognize is that as far as community is concerned, it's really built when you are picking clients that you work with, and when you are essentially deciding if this is someone that you want to invest your time into building a relationship with. That's how I personally think it's important to think about the work that I do. And it sounds like that's what Ivy was also saying, is at the end of the day, it's about relationship building, and your best work comes out when you actually enjoy the work you're doing. And that's when both you are winning and the person on the receiving end is winning as well. And so it's important to know where your boundaries are and where your values are, because that's only going to help you succeed as well.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I feel at this point in the conversation, we're really digging deep into like what it means to be an entrepreneur, and not just what it means, but how to thrive and how to not feel like if you're just owning yourself in the process. So can you share some of the challenges that you face when transitioning to founder status, and how you've overcome or are overcoming these trials?
Yeah. So I'll jump in here. My past life, I actually worked in venture capital. I was a marketing advisor to our portfolio companies. And I would say that it was a powerful position to be in as a woman, and especially as a woman of color, in a very male-dominated space. And one of the things that I learned through that process is, there's 4 stages of the VC process. You've got your deal sourcing, your pitching, you have your due diligence, and then closing, right? But the most inequities on the basis of gender take place during that pitching process. And it's really important to recognize why that is, right? Because oftentimes women are asked questions during the pitching process that really dig holes into their financial plans and really dig holes into why their business model is risky, versus men, when they're questioned during the pitching process, their questions tend to be softer. They tend to be more growth focused versus about immediate issues around risk. And so nonetheless, as a result, when all your questions are about how you could visionize growth, then of course men, by the nature of the way that their pitching round goes during due diligence and closing, they tend to have essentially secured at least, I believe the number is 6 times more than what a woman secures during VC pitching rounds. And so I think that it's really important that we recognize those dynamics when we talk about what it means to be a founder and what it means to be a founder as a woman of color, because we have to, by the nature of the way we are operating in the systems that are around us, work 10 times harder, if not more, in order to validate why we are doing what we're doing. And it's even harder when you're doing something that's unconventional. And so, one of the things I think that's really important to recognize is both Evie and I talk a lot about how our goals, and Evie, I'm sorry if I'm assuming, but I believe I heard you say this. Our goals are to build sustainable businesses. We're not necessarily looking at how do we go IPO? How do we get our business bought out? We're looking at how can we create sustainable change within our business and make our business sustainable so that impact that we're creating can continue. And that's not how typically we approach entrepreneurship. And so recognizing the fact that that is a different approach, and that by the nature of that approach, we are also then often challenged on our understanding of how entrepreneurship even functions, is a reality that we have to navigate. And so as women and as and particularly BIPOC women, I think it's just so important to recognize that we are constantly having to navigate questioning that we wouldn't experience if anything else about us was more was different, and it came from a different place of privilege. And so I do think that, you know, community is so important. Evie mentioned mentors, like surround yourself with people that you admire, but also can learn from and challenge you. I think sometimes it's easy to surround yourself with people who only think the same way as you, but really surrounding yourself with people who also challenge you, so you can understand how the people who might question you think and understand how you want to approach that line of questioning for yourself is just really powerful.
Yes, Manpreet, I really appreciate everything that you just said. It's understanding the challenges that, you know, inevitably we do come up and face as women of color, but also understanding that the more we lean into our community, the more we lean into our coaches and mentors, we can create spaces so that the future generation of women of color who want to be doing cool things in entrepreneurship don't come up to the same sort of blocks and headache that we do. So I love that you talked about that, and really appreciate your response and the work that you're doing. In the last couple of minutes, I know that I'm like a action-oriented person. I'm like, what are the steps? Like, what's the process? How do you get it done? And of course, for everyone, that's going to be different because everyone is unique and has different background and has different skills they bring to the table. But I'd love to hear from both of you. What tips and words of wisdom do you have for people in media and communications who want to jump into entrepreneurship? And Evie, I'd love to hear from you first. We have about 3 minutes, and then really quickly from Manpreet.
Yes, so I would try to learn as much as you can on the job. So everything that I'm doing now are things that I've learned by doing in the creative corporate agency environment. And so if you're trying to build an agency or you're on a path of managing a team, right? What I learned in-house was how to manage a budget, how to manage client expectations, how to deal with feedback, how to keep a project on task. And so with business building, there's a lot that you have to build from scratch yourself, but you really prioritize what you actually need in the moment. And that's been so helpful to deprioritize what's on my plate, because if I look at everything that needs to get done, it's impossible. But that's not the point. Some of this will take years. So it's okay to just focus on what makes money, which is our creative production. And I learned these creative production skills from all the jobs I've had in my career and in internships. So really using your corporate job as that learning laboratory, you know, and stealing and taking what you're learning and then remixing it and giving it your own flavor and flair yourself or your own business. So it's almost like I'm building the antithesis. I'm building the anti-agency based on what I learned firsthand. And you can't be what you don't see. And there aren't many design for good agencies that are led by women of color. I've bought all the books on Amazon. I've stalked people on YouTube, and there aren't people who look like us and are coming from our frame of reference teaching others on how to do this. So it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, because the creative agency model can be sustainable and successful if you do it right.
Thanks so much for that. Manpreet, in the last minute, do you have any tips and words for wisdom for media and communications folk that want to end up in entrepreneurship? And what happens, maybe you can also speak to how you can approach that if you don't work for a corporate or if you don't work in an agency.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the ways I found startups to be such a great way to learn skills, because you get to do so many different things because the team is small. So that's where a lot of my skill development happened, was in the first startups that I joined after graduating, but even through internships while I was a student. The other thing I would say is like, look into really developing some of those business skills. I think those are really important. So one of the things that students can actually do is, I believe the BU Business School does this. I judge the VCIC competition at the University of Washington. I'm in Seattle. And it's essentially a competition that teaches you how to approach venture capital and how to create, like, approach due diligence, understand your cash flow, etc. And so I definitely recommend looking into opportunities even on campus to do some of these, like, essentially mock competitions or mock scenarios, so you can understand and develop skills that you might use for your own business. Really reach out to people that you feel are doing something that interests you and ask them questions, set up coffees. I mean, I think mentorship is just so critical, and mentorship can come in so many different shapes and forms. So develop some business skills. I think that those are really important because you can learn them on the job, but having some basic knowledge is actually super powerful. I always tell everyone, please take a stats course while you're in college, because even if you do marketing, statistics is something that can really help with really improving your skills as well.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of this amazing panel. Thank you so much to Ivy and Manpreet for sharing about your journeys and your experiences. I definitely learned from you, and I'm sure that the people listening have learned from you as well. I just want to also let everyone who's listening know that our next talk is Career Change, How to Pivot Industries and Succeed. And it's next. Ooh, my chat disappeared from me. Oh, How to Pivot Industries and Succeed. I'll start again. So our next talk, Career Change, is called Career Change, How to Pivot Industries and Succeed. And that is next Wednesday, March 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Manpreet and Ivellisse and myself included, if anybody listening wants to reach out, like, you can find us on LinkedIn. Please reach out to us there. And thank you again so much. I really enjoyed being here, really enjoyed feeling the energy, even though it was on Zoom, and loved learning from each and every one of you.
Yes. Thank you for having us. And I want to apologize for the technical issues on my end.
No worries.